everybody, this is Sean of Raw Select Music, and welcome to my last new record review for the year. And I figured if I'm going to end this, I might as well end on what could potentially be my favorite record of the year. And that would be Rose Spit and 14KT Rose Gold. I've been listening to this album a lot recently, and it is easily the best rapper-producer duo album I've heard since Freddie Gibbs' Madlib Pinata or Run the Jewels 2 LP and Killer Mike. So if you are a fan of any of those projects that I just mentioned, then this should definitely be on your radar, and I want to let you know why it's worth checking out. So with that being said, let's get into this guy. Going into this project, I already knew that I would like it from a hip-hop production side. And that's because I was already a fan of 14KT's music before I had heard anything from this album. I have his 14 Kilotape Redux album on Street Corner Music. Highly recommend that you check this out if you haven't heard it. And I think this series, the Solid Gold 7 series, I had already had one of these and was already impressed by his production. So, with that being said, I have to say 14KT's production on here is easily his best work yet. And not only is it 14KT's best work yet, his production on here is some of the most exciting, inventive, creative, interesting hip-hop production I've heard since LP's work on Run the Jewels 2 and Madlib's work on Pinata for Freddie Gibbs and for MF Doom on his classic album with for Mad Villainy. The production on here is seriously just that good. A good example of this is one of the first tracks that I heard on this album, I Believe. It starts off with just a funky drum break and some solid sample chopping on it. Nothing like too out of the ordinary for 14KT, but definitely it's the sort of stuff that appeals to me, that I really enjoy. Then, about somewhere around the halfway mark, a little breakdown happens, and there's this sort of soulful atmosphere that starts pouring into the track as it slowly turns into this crazy gospel breakdown, which eventually gives way to this drum and bass like breakdown, which eventually finishes on this super bass heavy halftime, almost trappy kind of beat that it just feels like you're taken on not to keep reusing it like an old cliche, just you're taken on a musical journey and you're in a completely different place from where you started from. That track alone sold me on this album. But this whole album is littered with exciting moments like that as well. And just like I Believe, this album is full of highlight moments like that. ICU was another early on highlight for me that it was almost like an album seller to me. And while it doesn't do anything as groundbreaking or as inventive as I Believe does, it's still interesting in its use of vocoder to help create a hook and its use of drums and bass. The track just comes together so well, and it's so effective, and not to mention that the head nod factor on this track is just off the wall. Other tracks on this album as well, another highlight, and was one of the tracks that I heard before listening to the album in full, was True, which features a guest verse from Royce the 5'9", and starts off with a fantastic build-up before the track even starts, and then comes in perfectly with its drums before eventually turning into a Detroit ghetto tech track featuring a guest verse or hook, whatever you want to call it. I don't know if you can really call DJ Assault a rapper or anything like that. But anyways, it eventually turns into a Detroit ghetto tech track. How many hip-hop productions in 2015 are bringing back an obscure genre like Detroit ghetto tech? Pretty much front to back on this album, there's something interesting going on every track. Throughout the entire album, every track covers a wide variety of moods and emotions. Some are a bit more reflective and a bit more emotional, and in some cases, some actually carry quite a weight of melancholy to them. Other tracks are a little bit more braggadocio, and some get a little bit more in your face. The head nod factor generally never leaves this album, however. And even when it does some things that take some really hard left turns, most specifically on the track with Duane Porter, what's the name of that? Give It All. It wanders into almost dance pop territory. And despite that sort of hard left turn, it somehow still manages to work on this album. And what I thought upon first listening to this album and previewing this track, I thought I was going to hate this track. It ended up becoming another highlight track on this album for me. Well, I could spend the rest of this video just gushing about how amazing 14KT's production on here is. I really probably should talk about the other half of Rose Gold. And actually, the reason that I was initially reluctant to get into this album, and that is Rose Spit, the MC side of Rose Gold. I say initially reluctant because when it comes to vocalists, be it singer or MC, and especially these days, with a lot of music that just vocally drives me absolutely insane, I didn't know what to expect from Rose Spit. Thankfully, though, all of those preconceived notions that I had about Rose Spit were completely dispelled upon hearing him on I Believe. And then subsequently, throughout this entire album, Rose Spit really shows that he can hold his own as a relatively unknown MC. And if anything, I think he shows that he's probably going to be an MC to look out for in the future. Much like 14KT's production on here, Rose Spit is pretty much comfortable doing a variety of different styles. Some of it sort of more old school with his flow, sometimes incorporating some of the more trappy cadences to his flow. But in any style that he does, he manages to do it convincingly and certainly with confidence that shows that he's comfortable in any sort of style that he chooses to rap in. From a lyrical standpoint, he's just as versatile. Some of the tracks on here sort of follow the typical sort of brag rap sort of stuff that you normally get from a lot of underground hip-hop albums. But he also gets into some of the more reflective, some of the more emotional stuff, and he's just as convincing doing that sort of stuff as he is when he is doing the more in your face, more combative, more egotistical stuff. So in that regard, Rose Spit is a pretty good all-around MC. Since I seem to be lumping nothing but praise on this album, I do have to say that this is by no means a perfect project. There are certainly tracks that aren't bad necessarily, but really just don't live up to, don't really live up to the own bar that they've set for themselves. An early example of that is Everybody Know, the second track on here, where Rose Spit, I don't know, just doesn't seem all that comfortable, or not even really that interested in the track. And this is probably like the least interesting of any of the productions on here. But even despite the fact that it's probably the weakest track on this entire album, the fact that it's still interesting and I can still listen to it still says a lot to the quality of this album. I do feel like I should, for just a little bit, talk about some of the guests that show up on this album, because it definitely seems like a bit of a Detroit love letter, since all the guests that show up on here seem to be Detroit natives. Dwan Porter, who you might know from Eminem, he's produced for Eminem for many years, shows up on what seems like almost a dance pop song and somehow turns it into one of my favorite tracks on the album. It has no right to work as well as it does, and yet still comes out working with the rest of the album. Royce da 5'9" and Elzhi both show up on this album and both turn in top-notch verses. JMSN adds some great vocal hooks to the two tracks that he pops up on. And then Jeru, I think that's how you say it, also turns in a top quality verse on here. I don't know much about him, but yeah, there aren't many guest appearances on here, but the guest appearances that are here definitely only add to the quality of this album and really do nothing to take away from it. The weird one is still that Dwan Porter one. That is such a weird track, but I love it. Honestly, aside from just getting into a track-for-track breakdown, I don't know what else to say about this album. It's one of the most inventive, interesting, exciting hip-hop albums I've heard in a long time. And if you're a fan of your rapper-producer duos like your Run the Jewelses or your Primes or Pinata, I cannot recommend this album enough. And from everything that I've been hearing, it seems like this is not the last album that they're going to be doing together. So I feel like the future looks pretty bright for these two guys. So yeah, Rose Spit 14KT, Rose Gold, my favorite hip-hop album of the year, maybe my favorite album of the year. I'll let you know about that in the future. Yeah, if you have not checked this out, highly recommended. I have a feeling that Rose Gold is a name we're going to be hearing a lot from in the future, and definitely you should be checking this out. So yeah, that's going to be it for me today. If you've heard Rose Gold, I want you to let me know what you thought of it. Let me know down in the comments. Of course, head over to my WordPress and Steemit blogs if you want to check out some of the music for yourself. That's where I always keep the music links. And like I said, this is going to be my last review for the year. I'm going to finish out the year with my top 5 records of the year. And it should be pretty interesting because 2017 ended up being a very different year for me in terms of the music that I bought and the music that I listened to. So yeah, definitely check that out. I'm going to be putting out content until the end of the year. Thank you very much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Like, share, subscribe, do all that shit. Follow me on Twitter. All my social media links are in the description. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much for watching this channel in 2017. I know I'm just sort of getting started. I'm still trying to find my footing as far as how best to go about approaching these reviews and finding out what sort of content you guys are looking for. But yeah, this is my way of saying if you've ever stopped by here and you've enjoyed any of the content that I put up on here, I want to say thank you. And yeah, look forward to some little end of the year shit from me in the next week. So thank you very much, and I will see you in the next video.